This is our Google Classroom best practices for elementary, but it can be used across a lot of different grade levels. But if you would like to sign in right away, this is the QR code. My name is Tina Nunez, and I'm part of the EdTech Plus team. And we're going to start off with organizing topics. To create a topic, go to Create, and then select Topic. Topics can be set up in a variety of ways, but the biggest thing you need to remember is to be consistent. You can set up topics by days if you're only going to use Google Classroom on specific days throughout the month, or even weekly or monthly in this case. I would not suggest having a new topic every single day. Classwork within Google Classroom will get pretty overwhelming. Another way you can set up topics is also by different core standards. For elementary, one of the best ways to set up topics is by subject area. So you can have a reading topic and a math topic. Keep all of the topics very short, and you can add emojis to those topics to make them easier to distinguish between them. To add an emoji, when you are naming a topic, you're going to want to right-click, choose emoji and symbols, and then you should be able to add any type of emoji. Now that we've set up some topics within our Google Classroom, let's talk about how we can create assignments underneath those topics. Assignment best practices would be to add dates. You can also include units as well as lessons, so students can quickly see what order to complete those lessons in. Another thing would be to keep all of the newest assignments on the top. Google Classroom tends to keep 10 assignments under a topic visible. So instead of having to view all and scroll through every single assignment, it's best to keep the newest ones here on the top. Keep the titles short, but you might want to also include those emojis as well as what unit or standard this matches so it matches the topic. You can also include where those activities should be completed, either at home or within the classroom. So in this particular Google Classroom, I've added emojis where you can see where one unit begins and ends. Another way that you can incorporate emojis within assignments is to add check marks when everybody in the classroom has completed an assignment, essentially making that assignment completely done and archived. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to a student version to show you why those naming conventions can be kind of important for the titles of assignments. Students can go up here within their classwork tab to view all of their work. When they view their work, it takes all of the work out of the Google Classroom and puts it in a large running list of all activities. If you label these consistently, students can very quickly see that this was a science ecosystem lesson from Unit 1, Lesson 1. They can see that these are reading, that this is social studies, and they can quickly see any of their assignments that have been assigned to them. They can see any of them that have been returned that are already graded, and any assignments that are currently missing. Now, this becomes very important as best practices in elementary because when students are in multiple classes, students are able to go to their to-do list and they can see all of their classes at one time. They'll be able to view all of their assignments that they need to finish up right here within the same space. So organizing this in the best way for students allows them to get into the best practices for going through that space within all Google Classrooms. Now that we've talked about topics as well as titles, let's get into the instruction part of an actual assignment. So here in the instructions, chunk out instructions to make sure that instructions are short but still have enough information to complete those activities independently. One of the other things you can add to instructions as well would be emojis. But the other thing to add to instructions that I found very, very helpful is to add links within the instruction space. So in this case, students are going to be completing a journal entry, and there is a rubric here that students are going to be graded on. I have created an exemplar of a filled out journal entry. Now, one of the reasons I want to add this link is for parents who get the Guardian summaries. They'll be able to look at those instructions within the Guardian summaries and click on any links that are within the instructional space. So before I get a link, I always like to go to share and change the exemplars to anyone with the link can view, so that way parents can view this link as well. So I'm going to go back to my instructions and add in that exemplar. So I'm going to go here and add in that link. And this will become an active link within the student Google Classroom as well as in the Guardian summaries. Another thing I also like to add is the Common Core State Standard. Now, don't forget that Google has recently added all of these text features to make the instructions a little bit distinguishable here within this space. So I've very quickly gone back and formatted the core ideas and main verbs of each of the instructions that need to be completed. And I have made the reference materials as italics. So once again, if I go back to that student classroom and I look at this assignment, students can very easily see the instructions for what need to be completed. They will have a link to the example, and they will also have information about the rubric. So I'm going to go over to a parent account to show you the parent guardian summaries. If you add in the links to those exemplars and you have it set up where everyone with the link can view, parents can very easily click on those exemplars and see examples for themselves. So here's one of my tips for rubrics, since we're on this topic within Google Classroom, is try to create a rubric that is a little bit more generic and not make it super specific for one particular activity. So in this case, this can be used for all narrative journal entries. And the reason that you're going to want to do this is if I go to a different assignment within Google Classroom and I want to add in a rubric, you can reuse those rubrics once you've already had one created, and you can pull from those specific activities and use those rubrics over and over again. Now, one last thing I want to share within a Google Classroom is how you can use a Google Classroom assignment link for the younger students. Now, what I mean by this is that a Google Classroom can get very overwhelming if you have a lot of assignments and a lot of words on here that can make this very difficult for younger students. What you can do is create an activity and go to these three dots from the teacher dashboard and copy a link to that particular activity. Now, what's very helpful about getting that link is if you have a Bitmoji classroom or something, you can select a specific image within that classroom and you can insert a link right to that Google Classroom activity. So when students have this Bitmoji classroom, they'll be able to click on this and go directly to that activity each week on that same Bitmoji classroom. You can do the same thing within Seesaw. Now let's talk about configuring settings within Google Classroom. Now within a Google Classroom, the stream can be a great place to provide announcements or important information to students. However, in Google Classroom, the stream does automatically put a link to every single assignment that you create within the classwork space, which can get pretty overwhelming, especially for elementary students. So a way that we can fix this space is through our settings. I'm going to go up here to our gear icon and scroll down to General, and then I'm going to go here to Stream. And you can decide if you want students can post and comment on that stream or only teachers can post and comment. It's kind of up to you. On the classwork piece, the way that you can hide all of those classwork assignments is to hide notifications. So once I have set this up and I save it, only information that has been posted directly on the stream are going to be what is viewable by the students. Now, some other things to look at here within the settings is the class name. One of my suggestions is to add either the content or the teacher name first. And then you might also want to add in that particular school year, so that way it's easy for you to distinguish those classrooms when you go to archive them. This is also great for best practices when students have multiple classrooms. So once again, I'm going to go over to my student Google Classroom just to show you that on their dashboard, it's only going to have the first beginning parts of those classroom names. So you're going to want to distinguish them between each other, especially if some teachers end up having very similar Google logos, or if they end up choosing the same picture. I have one classroom here and I ended up picking the exact same background as this teacher. If students go here to the main menu and try to look up the classrooms, an automatic icon here based on the first letter of that class. Sometimes it's good to have that first letter or first word of that classroom be either the subject or content area, or sometimes even the year. You can also configure the invitation codes to having students get into a Google Classroom. Google has now created invite codes where you can turn on copying a link, or you can choose to display a classroom code. My tip for a class code is you can generate a brand new class code if you have letters that are very similar to each other. This is a really good code because a lot of the different letters and numbers are very distinguishable from each other. Another way that you can configure settings is if you go here to the main menu and you scroll all the way down to the bottom of classrooms, these settings configure email notifications. Now, sometimes you might choose to turn them completely off. I tend to like to turn off most things other than private comments or comments that mention me. It really kind of depends on you which one of these you want to configure, but you can personalize them. You can change these for every single Google Classroom that you have. Another thing that you can get students in the habit of doing, it's a great best practice, is to have them log into Google, have them log into their Gmail, and have them learn how to clean out their Gmail and getting used to cleaning out that space as well. So that's just kind of another little side tip. Now, my last tip and trick for today is setting up some Google Classrooms for some different purposes. So we had our overall Google Classroom that had our subjects and our main activities we were going to do. I also suggest don't put every single activity within a Google Classroom. Really put in activities that need to be graded or projects that parents can help out with at home. So one of the Google Classrooms I used to have was a beginning of the year Google Classroom. Students are still getting used to turning things in, or you're trying to get them used to using those tools. Have a Google Classroom set up for the very beginning of the year. Another Google Classroom was a Google Classroom for early finishers. So when you have students saying, I don't know what I should do, I just finished early. I had, if you were finished early in reading, there's finished early in math. Students can pick any one of these activities and they can complete them. So I tell students you just can keep completing activities until all of those activities are grayed out. Another way to do Google Classroom is to create a flipped Google Classroom, activities they complete at home. And these are some activities they complete in class. Home tend to have a lot of video resources. And then the activities that are in class are discussion activities that they fill out themselves. The final way is to have a Google Classroom book club, create question activities. Is students can add comments, and then if you set it up where they can reply back to each other, students can continue to have those sort of literature circle discussions. Now, the final tip I have for having a secondary Google Classroom is to create either a template Google Classroom, or some teachers call it a staging Google Classroom, but it's always good to have a backup. You can go up here to create and reuse the post and add that to your staging/template Google Classroom. It's almost like having a favorites, like keeping those favoritive assignments in that one place. So when you do create another classroom, let's say the following year, or another place, you can go to create and pull the reused post from the template class itself. So once again, I'm Tina Nunez from EdTech. Please don't forget to sign in and then fill out our feedback form from today. Thank you so much for joining me on some Google Classroom best practices.